Really, the entire book, the action of the entire novel takes place in an LSD trip. It's a complete LSD trip. So at the beginning of the book, the protagonist, this strange psychiatrist, Dr. Zach Busner, it's 1970, so it's the right period for LSD. One of the people he lives in this strange therapeutic community with, you know, in English you would say spikes him, gives him LSD without him knowing it. So then at the beginning of the novel, which is told through the consciousness of this man, Zach Busner, hopefully the reader begins to experience it as if they were beginning to have an LSD trip as well. I don't know why I'm laughing about it, but I suppose I took a lot of LSD when I was a young man. So I think I was very interested in trying to get that experience onto the page, because it's not often, in my view, done very well. I took, there's a big drug problem in England at the moment with a drug called Spice, and you know, they were selling it legally as a legal high, and it comes in all different varieties. But I took some of that, I was just interested in it, and it was a more powerful trip than I remember from LSD. That was 2 or 3 years ago, so I've had a recent major psychotropic experience, but I remember what it was like to take LSD 20, 30 years ago as well. Yeah, I remember it very well. Yes, he's my alter ego. He's what people call, when they talk about drugs, a partial agonist. So he half attacks the thesis of the book, and half is the thesis of the book. He's an equivocal figure. I was fascinated, always been fascinated by doctors, and particularly by psychiatrists. I was very influenced by R.D. Laing, the anti-psychiatric writer who wrote in the 60s and 70s, by Foucault, by Thomas Zaj, the Hungarian-American psychoanalytic thinker. I was very influenced by them, and very influenced by their idea that in societies like ours, psychiatrists decide who is mad and who is sane, and therefore they define our reality far more than priests or politicians. So Zach Busner for me has always been this representative figure who is responsible, like the arbitrator, for deciding in that way. And so, yes, I've carried him from one narrative to the next, but he plays slightly different roles in all of the books, I suppose. Not exactly. I'm not saying by alternative history, I don't mean that there are different facts about the 20th century that perhaps can be connected into a different narrative. I think it's a different way of looking at the 20th century. You know, that it's like one way of looking at history is a Marxist way, is to say it's all large impersonal forces that determine the fate of individuals. And another way is to say it's huge individuals, whether it be Hitler or Macron, who kind of create the reality in which we live. And I suppose that my alternative history is to look at events in a different way, and to stop thinking about X causes Y, or Y causes X, or it's the individual, or it's the mass, but look at history almost in a psychedelic way. It's all happening at once, and you can't disentangle it in that way. Yeah. So for me, the fact that the USS Indianapolis, which was the US naval ship that carried the bomb across the Pacific, it was then loaded onto the Enola Gay and dropped on Hiroshima, and the ship then sailed on and was sunk by the Japanese, by the torpedoes. That's a more significant fact in terms of my way of looking at history than the bomb itself, in a way. You know, in other words, to understand the bomb, you have to see it in the context of all the fate of all of these people. You think about a big naval ship, a cruiser, so we're talking about a vast ship, nearly 500 meters long, carrying 1,000 men, and hit by 2 torpedoes, one of which hits the magazine, where the ammunition is stored. The whole ship goes down within 5 minutes. It's sunk. It's night time. 1,000 men go into the sea, and because of a mess-up in communications, nobody knows the ship is gone. So the men are in the water for 3 days, and during that time, 800 of them are killed by sharks. It must have been the most extraordinary, awful thing imaginable. I mean, like a kind of weird floating Holocaust with these sharks rising up out and grabbing men and pulling them down. The description, there's only one book written about the sinking, but the descriptions are incredible. And of course it's that Quint, the character of the fisherman in Steven Spielberg's Jaws, talks about, because he's a survivor of the Indianapolis. But I think the truth of my vision comes to me because only 3 or 4 weeks ago, finally, the wreck of the Indianapolis was actually discovered for real. So the whole story is, it's Freud's return of the repressed. It's now come back up. Well, it's very interesting, that's right. The scene in which Quint tells Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, and the police chief, Brody, played by Roy Schneider, in the little rocking boat, he tells them the story of the Indianapolis. Well, the script was written by Robert Benchley as well, who wrote the original novel. I don't know exactly why it's in the film and not in the novel. It's very strange. I did read something that maybe even Robert Shaw, who plays Quint, had suggested it. But it's a fascinating little detail, because without the speech in the movie, I wouldn't have gone to the Indianapolis or realized about this massive shark attack. I did an event for the last volume of the trilogy, Phone, which has just come out in England at Shakespeare and Company here in Paris. So it was an English language event. And I was talking about my style, and I was saying, you know, because some of the English critics say that I am trying to exhaust the modernist style. I'm trying to kind of wear it out, kind of get... And I was saying it's nonsense. On the contrary, I think of my style not as retro-modernism, not that I'm copying Joyce or Virginia Woolf, but as turbo-modernism, that I'm going even faster and further into, because I still think that the modernist techniques, free and direct prose, the continuous present, stream of consciousness, the Elysian montage of scenes, are the right way to reflect. They are the naturalism of our period, but I think they need to be even more powerful now to capture the world we live in. So, yeah. And also I think it's fascinating because if you read Ulysses now, you can't really understand it without a book that they published called Allusions in Ulysses, and it's as thick as the novel, because we weren't in Dublin on the 16th of June 1904. We don't know what it was like, but it's the same with my text, which is imbriqué with tous les allusions, all of these kind of different allusions. But it's now, they're all about now. But the thing is that the novel itself has changed now in the digital age. A digital text is not contained, it's fluid. You can find out the definition of a word or an allusion really easily. So why aren't novels changing to reflect that? Why aren't novels becoming open in that way, or even including things that necessarily a reader won't understand? Because the reader can find out. I think the whole reading experience and its relationship to style has now changed. And I think, you know, I mean, I don't mean to be arrogant, I think very few writers are responding to that. You know, I think that novels have become, you know, in English we say it's like a heritage industry. They're like, you know, or like classical music. People are writing novels that are essentially in a style that can't cope with the reality we're in. Yeah, well, that's because I don't think consciousness, you know, is a unitary phenomenon. You know, it presents itself to us. You think to yourself, well, what's going on in my head? I'm Jan. Will knows nothing about. It's completely discret. It's separate. I don't think that's true. I think your mind and the mind of this gentleman behind the camera and my mind are actually all quite joined together and flow into each other in that way. And I wanted to reflect that stylistically. Well, it's just the same phenomenon we all have. You'll be thinking in a vague way, incoherent way about something, and suddenly an actual phrase will come into your head like, I must finish this interview now, yeah? And then you'll say it, but it'll be like a voice in your head. And I think that's different from the way we think a lot of the time, which is very obscure and an image, a sensation, and then suddenly there will be actual words. So in the novels, I move between using Roman for, as it were, general description, and then suddenly the italics are hearing those words, yeah. The young man at Shakespeare and Company who'd reread the last volume, which is even longer than Shark, said he hadn't been able to sleep. I was really pleased about that, because that's what I suffered, but much, much worse writing them. Because, yeah, they're very, very like a shark. They're kind of relentless. There's a relentless pace to the prose, but that reflects what it's like a lot of the time. I think the pressure we're under, you know, if you think about your own day, nowadays you will be thinking all day often. You'll have very few periods of just reverie or quiet meditation. There's a kind of relentlessness to contemporary life and to our thoughts. Yeah, no, I didn't know I was writing a trilogy till after Umbrella, after the first novel. I thought that was a standalone book, and the ideas for Shark and Phone came to me when I'd finished Umbrella. I thought, yes, you've grouped together mental illness, warfare and technology and centered it on the First World War, but you can do this for the Second World War. And if you do it for the Second World War, you need to do it for the wars of the early post-9/11 wars as well. So I could see that. But now, yes, it is finished because I've run out of history. I'd have to start writing. I'd have to be encouraging wars in order to write about them. So yeah, this is finished, and I need, as we say in English, I need to move on.